Hi, I'm Sin from ArtScience Museum. Thank you for listening in to Feeling the Future Conversations, part of Art Science at Home. This program of talks examines the human capacity to imagine new futures in an uncertain world by reflecting on where we are and where we might be heading. It's our pleasure introducing Anab Jain and Jon Ardern of London-based design studio Superflux. They bring the future to life in their works by creating experiences where people can see, feel, and touch the potential of the world we are creating. Anab and Jon will be speaking about the Singapore edition of Mitigation of Shock at ArtScience Museum's 2219 Futures Imagined exhibition. In this installation, you are invited to experience both the lived consequences of global warming at a human scale and also a story of hope.
Hi, I'm Anab Jain. I'm a designer and a filmmaker.
And I'm Jon Ardern. I'm a designer and a maker. And together we run Superflux.
We sort of, for over a decade, have been exploring ways in which our design and artistic practice can help imagine plural future worlds.
Yeah, our work kind of looks at big picture problems as well as trends, both technological and things like climate change, these big picture things, and then we try to find ways to encapsulate that in relatable experiences and objects, be that kind of films or installations.
Yeah. In some ways, our work is both very grounded in the present and deeply empirical, and at the same time, highly speculative. And we kind of tack somewhere in between looking at the present and also of what is, but also what could be.
I think that's a difficult question to answer. I mean, I think like everybody else, we're kind of it's a strange time. Um, we have been spent a lot of time thinking about the ways in which the world might drastically change. It's hard to know how much that has kind of influenced our experience of this current situation because it's you don't really have a kind of a if there was an alternate me that hadn't been exploring these things, it'd be
Hard. It would be hard to imagine that kind of a world.
yeah. Um, but yeah, it's certainly it's certainly kind of it's tested a lot of our thinking. I think it's been interesting as well as kind of difficult.
Yeah, very, very difficult. It kind of feels like we've spent so much time working with people a lot of people who have been in decision making capacities to kind of explore, worst case scenarios. And it kind of feels that a lot of that was not taken to heed, and now we find ourselves living in one of those scenarios. And there are times when I feel quite overwhelmed by all the anxiety. But I've kind of also moved past that a little bit. We are already 3 months into the lockdown, that it feels like a moment of being in between worlds where there's no going back to normal as it used to be, and nobody really knows what this new normal is, or even if there's such a thing, and maybe it's not worth thinking about it in that way. But can we recalibrate, and can we kind of look at this crisis in its complexity and try and start to do some critical sense making around it. At the minute, it feels like everyone's trying to grab at quick answers, and I'm not sure that's going to be very helpful.
Yeah, I think it'll take time um, for the real lessons of this to emerge and become clear. I think that's a difficult question to answer. My response would be that we might not plan for the future in we should plan to be surprised, I guess. We should understand the forces at work and not expect um, that we can control everything that is going to unfold in the coming years and decades. Um, and I think we need to kind of adjust our attitude. I think we need to we need to be okay with uncertainty. And I think that's kind of one thing that actually our practice has, at least for me, it's kind of helped. I don't think I was kind of as disturbed by the uncertainty of this situation. I think I don't think there's anything you can do about the distress of witnessing distress, of witnessing the impact on those that you love. But I think there's definitely something you can do about preparing yourself to be surprised.
Yeah. It kind of, for me, it's not so much about not planning as much as starting to look for answers in places we haven't looked for yet. Like, we have relied so far on very specific kinds of instruments which are evidence based, undoubtedly scientific and rigorous, but they only can tell us a certain amount of they can only measure up to a certain extent and predict up to a certain extent. And I think those strategic, scientific, rational tools might have found their limits, and maybe we need to sit with this possibility of uncertainty, and maybe we need to train ourselves to hold multiple worldviews simultaneously. um, and that is not easy, and therefore I think that's where some of our kind of work and life, in terms of living through quite a lot of precarity in our own practice, uncertainty, not knowing whether we will survive in this practice or not, at a personal level, as well as kind of the tools of storytelling and object making and materiality and imagination, might have something to say about where we could go. Like, maybe there are some of these tools could help us to imagine things that we haven't been able to imagine so far. I quite almost think of it as the dark arts of of expression.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could maybe encapsulate it in that we should maybe focus more on preparing rather than planning.
Yeah.
Would you say?
Yeah, and imagining and exploring and sitting with it,
As
and
part of that preparation.
as part of the thing, because it's going to be constant. I think it feels like each day the frame that we think of as our own worldviews is shifting. Like, literally every day could be a different frame, and if that becomes consensus, how prepared are we for that? So I think it seems to be very much about kind of understanding the self, and understanding the self in relation to everything else, and recalibrating that constantly.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, perhaps rather than jump straight into mitigation of shock, maybe Anab, would you like to
Yeah, I mean,
talk about Dubai as,
sure.
as an example of our work?
Yeah, I mean, we have quite a few different projects at different scales. I think this project that John's mentioning is a project we did a few years ago for the Ministry of Energy, the government of UAE. They came to us saying, help us kind of uh, imagine 5 different possible futures for around renewable energy investment, because we want to make a decision that will kind of be the decision about our 2050 energy strategy. And we sort of use that opportunity to translate some of their econometric data and modeling into a very tangible city, and mapped out those 5 features through animations and film onto that city. And we presented that to the cabinet, to the ministers, the prime minister, and members of energy companies. They were very intrigued and surprised by some of the things and some of the changes that they might have to make. One amongst them was the idea that increasingly they would have to give up a lot of personal kind of transport, like stop driving too many cars and start using public transport, which didn't go down well. One of the ministers said to me, I can't even tell my own son to stop driving his car. But the thing, what we had done is something that we do a lot, is not just present the whole world. We try and zoom in and explore some of the artifacts known as like diegetic prototypes, if you like, of those worlds. So for that particular scenario, we had created, worked with scientists in my hometown in Ahmedabad to create air samples of what the air would be like in 2036 if our behavior stays the same. And so we walked them over to this object that emits vapor from those air samples. And this was really really noxious air, and just one whiff of it was enough to drive home the point that no amount of data could. And soon after that, they announced their energy strategy, investing huge amounts in renewables. And we feel that alongside the data and alongside the strategic advice, the experiential and the kind of imaginative views into those possible futures did play a role in that decision.
Yeah, I think we are hardwired as a species to respond to direct engagement with
Yeah.
the world around us, and I think that, well, I hope that that piece of work that took the data that they'd created and gave it a visceral form, an experiential form, um, helped to kind of illustrate something that, that a clean graph with numbers that you might know intellectually is bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's to really kind of make that a visceral experience, and hopefully that really helped them come to the right decision. Either way, we're happy with the path they chose.
Yeah, and I mean, I think at this point it's very important to say that the tools and the instruments that we are talking about should not be seen as set dressing to scenarios that have already been modeled. So, for this work and for a lot of our work, we work very closely with kind of scientists or technologists or social scientists and researchers to understand not just the trends and weak signals, but to actually think of the future as a material and to explore its materiality in quite a rigorous fashion. And from that understanding and knowledge emerges this kind of world making exercise and these kind of very emotive experiences.
Yeah, so this is a work we've been, I guess we've been working on it for,
Almost 5 years.
I guess it could be
Yeah, yeah.
almost 5 years now. We were interested in finding ways that where we could take this thing called climate change that we're all aware of. We're all aware of its the enormity of its potential impact. But I think kind of within that enormity there is a sort of an impersonal, like, this is something that will happen to other people. This is something that other people, governments, agencies will deal with or not. Um, and we kind of wanted to find a way, a lens in a way to kind of make it personal, make it relatable, um, explore the ways in which it might ask us to respond, the ways in which we might respond to the situations that it might bring us. So yeah, it's a project that those are the big themes really.
Yeah.
And in order to explore that, we went about creating an apartment from the future. We explored making food systems. We looked at kind of at the impact of climate change on global food supply, which seemed to be kind of one of the um, big influences that will affect a lot of people. We kind of looked at that, tried to understand what that will do, and then went about, in response to that, exploring how you might transform your home or apartment in order to kind of try and meet that challenge.
It is currently in exhibit form. Of course, the museum is closed, but it's something that people can go and see once it opens. You walk through the door of HDB apartment, and you suddenly find yourself into what feels extremely familiar, but then. Slowly, it becomes very clear that you've literally entered a multi-species microcosm of sorts, where there is a kind of new ways of living with and through these entangled kind of different species. All the plants and vegetation is growing in and through the apartment. We're very inspired by permaculture and try to explore ways in which we grow food, um, maintaining companion health of different species, and making sure that people can actually maintain and look after these growing systems in their homes. Everything from a ration cart to a giant canoe also occupy the apartment. And looking outside, you see a very altered view of Singapore, which has got a lot more water. It's a lot more humid. But at the same time, you can see that huge amount of ingenuity of the people has helped find a new hopeful way of living. Amphibious architecture, lots of adaptations, lots of new kind of food and growing systems and energy systems means that people have not just let climate change wash over, but actually made active kind of decisions to alter the way they live.
In addition to that, there's also, you'll find artifacts like newspapers and the radio show that kind of give a sense of the political impact of climate change. And it's not so much that we didn't want to show a dystopia or a utopia. We wanted to explore that space in between, which I think is kind of, if you look at history, that seems to be more like the way things go. Even when it's the end of the world as we know it, there are certain kind of human traits and characteristics that survive. Things like community, things like rituals around food, things that might seem strange now suddenly become, we adapt to them, we find it normal. So we really wanted to kind of explore this world, this kind of a messy world. There are some things that might feel better than today, the sense of community and the sense of kind of coming together, which we wanted to explore in opposition to a lot of the Hollywood's kind of portrayal of extreme events, where you see within minutes everybody's grabbing a gun and they're shooting each other, which hasn't seemed to bear out at least in the UK. It doesn't seem to bear out that way. When we've had, you have a certain amount of selfishness, but it doesn't seem to end in chaos. People seem to find ways around it. We're kind of, as a species, we're quite adaptable and ingenious. So we wanted to really kind of encapsulate that. I think when we think about climate change, it's this big, impersonal, amorphous event. Often it's considered as this thing that's coming at us, but it's out in the future, or it's out in the world somewhere, and it's not, unless we've recently directly experienced something that is attributed to climate change, it feels kind of distant, it feels bigger than us, it feels kind of alien, and we wanted to look at the ways it might touch our lives and kind of make it feel a bit more intimate, make it feel a bit more like this is something that we will live with, something that we can relate to on a personal level, and have it touch the things that we're kind of intimate with. So touch, our relationship to food and our relationship to our homes, and really kind of place a lens on it that really makes it relatable.
Yeah, definitely. It was when people walk into the apartment, at no point at anywhere does it say climate change. Now you're looking at a project about climate change. Even in the way we describe the project, in the label outside, I think we leave sort of fragments of as touch, fragments or evidence of things that people are able to connect the dots and fathom for themselves what those connected dots lead to, and experience in this very kind of visceral and kind of embodied way what it would mean to live in this world. What would home feel like? What would our relationships feel like? What would we eat? How would we, and some of that is actually, so many people are writing to us who've been to both the apartments, the first one in Barcelona and in Singapore, that has helped them to actually rethink the pandemic framework, because they've spent some time in these apartments, and they appreciate what it was giving to them now, because they're forced to live in a kind of, well, we are all finding ourselves in different times, living in under a kind of a lockdown, and having to do or having observed this panic around food shortages or perceived food shortages. And it kind of, that's somehow what we're trying to get at, is that we sometimes projections or evidences or graphs don't put people into them. They are without people. They are just kind of projections. But if people don't feel that they are part of those projections, how can they kind of find the means to kind of not just embrace what's happening and work with it, but to have the desire to do something about it. So I think all those kind of invisible things are things we want to surface and play with.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing I'd add to that is one of the tools that we used for ourselves in order to get close to this this future was it's set at a time in the future when our son will be our age now. So that was kind of one of the key points for us to explore it and for us to get close to it. We're imagining, you know, the life that our son might be living when he's our age, and how he might kind of live through this, and that was kind of that was a way for us to get closer to it in order to hopefully bring other people into it. So I hope if you get a chance to see the exhibit, or you have seen the exhibit, some of that comes through, and you can even spot some of his pictures on the wall of the apartment.
I just want to conclude by saying to go away with and think about, you know, what it means to give these forms of gifts to future generations.
That was Anab Jain and Jon Ardern of Superflux on Mitigation of Shock. That's currently part of ArtScience Museum's 2219 Futures Imagined exhibition. Our speakers for the next Feeling the Future talk are Lizzie Mola and Lynn Froggatt, who will be speaking about how exhibitions can help imagine the future through a process of cultural contagion, where we catch ideas and feelings as they circulate in the social unconscious. After the pandemic, exhibitions can help support the civic role of museums in bringing what is felt into public conversation. Thank you again for joining us at ArtScience at Home today. Please continue to stay safe and keep well, and we hope to see you very soon.